Chapter 402. Chainworm Sonny had no idea if Master Roan was currently in the sanctuary, but judging by the fact that the guard did not immediately send him away, he probably was. The young awakened gave Sonny an evaluating look, then whistled softly and returned to his alcove. Nothing seemed to happen for a few minutes, but then Sonny heard the sound of approaching footsteps. A young woman wearing a simple white garment appeared from behind the curve of the corridor and glanced at him, then gestured for him to follow. Sonny shifted slightly, then moved forward, walking behind the girl. What would you know? I am walking into the lair of a legacy clan of my own free will. Never say never, I guess. He had really never expected himself to do something like this anytime soon. Instead of walking further into the compound, they entered a narrow staircase and ascended to the very top of the sanctuary. There, massive stone monoliths lay flat on top of the menhirs, creating an almost uninterrupted surface. There was a whole separate world above the citadel, as it turned out. Grass and moss covered the expansive stone circle, which stretched far into the distance. Sonny could see guards standing at the outer edge of it, keeping watch on the neighboring islands. Here and there, siege weapons were placed at irregular intervals, aimed at the sky. Right above the White Feather residence, a graceful structure was built on top of the ring of menhirs. With tall windows and beautiful ivy climbing its walls, it resembled a large stone chateau. The walls of the mansion were still wet from rain and shone softly in the light of the rising sun. A path led from its door to an airy pavilion at the edge of the stone monolith, with a round table standing in its center. The mighty griffin was laying near the pavilion, its head hidden under one of the eagle wings, while Master Roan himself seemed to be enjoying a hearty breakfast inside. The young woman gestured for Sonny to go forward and walk toward the mansion, soon disappearing behind its door. I guess this is how saints live. For a moment, Sonny was full of envy. The chateau on top of the sanctuary seemed so beautiful, simple, and peaceful, the complete opposite of the noisy, overcrowded, and poisoned world where humans came from. Of course, that peace was a lie. The dream realm might have seemed like a paradise sometimes, but that paradise was dire and twisted, hiding all kinds of horrors that were ready to descend upon you at any moment. Whatever. My house is much better anyway. It has all a man can need and then some. I bet they don't even have designer lamps here. Pitiful, really. Entering the pavilion, Sonny greeted Master Roan with all respect he could muster. The older man smiled and invited Sonny to sit with a relaxed gesture. Good morning, Sunless. I must admit I didn't expect you to seek me out so soon. Did something happen? Sonny sat down, smiled politely, then shook his head. Nothing that I would want to concern you with. You see, I am not here to talk about something that happened, but more about something that might happen. Master Roan raised an eyebrow and laughed. Don't tell me. Wait, are you here with a business proposal? Am I about to become a customer of Sonny's brilliant emporium? Sonny choked. No, what? Where did you hear about that? The handsome master grinned. I hear things. What are those bastards saying behind my back? Sonny forced out a smile, then shook his head. No, I am not here as a highly respected, rich, and famous entrepreneur, nor am I here as a well-regarded member of the wilderness survival faculty of the Awakened Academy. I am actually here as an advanced scout of the Sanctuary of Noctis. Master Roan grew serious. Oh, continue. Sonny nodded, then hesitated for a bit and finally said, After we parted 2 days ago, I returned to the sanctuary. On my way back, however, I rested for a while on the Iron Hand Island. And there, well, I found the remains of a nightmare creature there. The older man frowned slightly. That's not unheard of. Iron Hand is usually safe, but you know how chained isles are. Nightmare creatures migrate, sometimes naturally, sometimes to avoid the crushing. Sonny scratched the back of his head. That's true. However, the abomination was a fallen demon. It is strange to see one that close to the sanctuary, and especially so because I have never seen or even heard about that type of creature. It was rather scary. Roan's frown deepened. A fallen demon on the Iron Hand Island. That is indeed strange. You've done well to bring me this information, Sunless. Did you get a good look at it by any chance? Sonny sighed. Well, you see, it was in the depths of night. Then he smiled. But luckily I can see perfectly in the dark, so yes, I got a very good look. Let me describe it. He described the demon to the best of his ability, not sparing any detail. He even remembered every wound and injury on the abomination's body, hoping that their nature can shine a light on what exactly had killed the bastard. The longer Sonny talked, the darker Master Roan's face became. Finishing his report, Sonny glanced at the older man and asked, "So, what type of a demon was that exactly? And why have I never encountered one before?" Master Roan shook his head. "You are lucky to have never met one of these fiends, kid. They are a very rare and vicious breed of nightmare creatures known as chain worms. Luckily, it was already dead. Otherwise, I doubt that we would be having this conversation right now. Even I am reluctant to face a demon such as this alone. No offense, Sunless, but if that thing was alive, you would have ended up as its dinner." Sonny hesitated for a bit, then asked cautiously, "Chain worms, why are they called that?" The older man sighed, then looked at the breathtaking vista of the chained aisles in front of them. After a while he said, "It is because these creatures feed on metal. Once one of the heavenly chains is weakened, they appear from the dark side to feast on it. Steel weapons are useless against these abominable things, so fighting one, let alone many, is almost an impossible task." Master Roan stared into the distance with a bleak expression, and then added darkly, "I've seen whole islands crumble into the below because of their hunger." Master Roan grew silent for a few moments, then smiled after noticing Sonny's troubled expression. "The heavenly chains near the sanctuary are all fine, though, so you have nothing to worry about." "That's not what I am worried about." Sonny had already received a piece of valuable information that could help him find the mysterious treasure, but he wanted to know more. Before he could ask another question, however, a sudden shadow shrouded the pavilion, the stone chateau, and the expanse of weathered stone surrounding it, as though a cloud moved across the sun, hiding it. The sleeping griffin stirred and raised its head, its vertical pupils narrowing. Just a moment later, the shadow disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Simultaneously, a strange sound reached Sonny's ears. It was as though 1,000 wings rustled as they cut the air. Then a woman was suddenly standing at the edge of the stone ring, her silhouette outlined against the rising sun by a bright halo. It seemed as though she had always been there, but Sonny could swear that there was no one near them just a second ago. "Oh!" The woman was tall and slender, her posture straight like an arrow. She was wearing a light steel armor, its pauldrons and greaves decorated with white feathers. Her long blonde hair was fluttering in the wind like a cascade of pale gold. When she turned around, Sonny saw two piercing amber eyes staring at him and shivered. Her face was cold and stunningly beautiful, more akin to that of a goddess than of a human being. The woman's pupils were narrow and vertical, exactly like those of the mighty griffin. The ruler of the sanctuary had returned home. Grab! With a shudder, Sonny forced himself to look away and hurriedly bowed. This was his second time meeting Tyrus of the White Feather clan, also known by her true name, Sky Tide, one of the few saints of the human race, the demigod in charge of the Chained Island. Just by virtue of existing, the saint exerted a strange influence on everything that surrounded her. It was not oppressive, like the dreadful aura of Gunlog's golden armor, just different. as if the world itself was reacting to her. The blades of grass seemed to bend slightly toward her. The wind sang subtly lower as she approached, and even sunlight appeared to become a bit brighter in her presence. Master Roan shifted and rose from his seat. "Good morning, sunshine." Sunny flinched. What?" It took him a couple of seconds to realize that the fearless griffin rider was addressing his wife, and not him. "Sunshine, sunshine." Is that how he addressed a saint? Well, she is his wife after all, I guess. Once he thought about it, everything made sense. But still, the idea of addressing a transcendent as sunshine seemed very weird for some reason. Sunny cautiously looked up and saw a wide smile on Roan's face. Saint Tyrus herself, however, was as cold as ever. "Good morning, Ro." Even her voice was cold and heavy, like the howl of an approaching storm. Turning her head slightly, Saint Tyrus looked at Sunny with a silent question. Countless poets would have been ruined if they saw the elegant curve of her eyebrow. Wow, wait, what am I thinking about?" Master Roan patted Sunny on the shoulder and said, "Awakened Sunless visited to tell me about a demon he encountered on the Iron Hand Island. It was a chain worm, already dead, fortunately. Still, we should explore the nearby island, don't you think?" Saint Tyrus lingered for a few moments, then shook her head. "No need. The only failing chain on the Isles is far away from the sanctuary, connecting Shipwreck Island to the Twisted Rock. This is where the chain worm came from. I just saw it myself." She turned away, then sighed slightly. "Of course, we will have to prepare. All islands are connected, after all. After the Twisted Rock falls, its demise will echo through the entire region. Many islands will shift, causing changes to the severity of the crushing on others. The migrations patterns of the nightmare creatures will be affected, too. I should probably get going." Sunny cleared his throat, then said awkwardly, It's been an honor to meet you again, Lady Tyrus. I shall take my leave then." Skytide nodded indifferently, then said, "Thank you for informing us of your finding, Awakened Sunless." He nodded, then rose from his seat and cautiously took a few steps away. When Sunny was almost out of the pavilion, however, the cold voice of the saint stopped him. "Wait." He turned around and forced out a smile. "Yes, how can I help you?" Tyrus looked at him for a few moments, then said in a calm, emotionless tone, "You come from the Forgotten Shore, if I am not mistaken." Sunny nodded. "Yeah, what about it?" The beautiful saint lingered for a second, then asked, "Song of the Fallen, do you know her?" "Cassie, why bring her up?" Sunny smiled. "Yes, we've met, why?" Saint Tyrus looked at him for a few moments, then said, "Good, Song of the Fallen will be visiting the sanctuary soon. She will be glad to see a familiar face, I think." With that, Skytide turned away, letting Sunny know that he was free to go. He hesitated for a second, then walked away. As soon as neither Master Roan nor Saint Tyrus could see his face, a dark expression appeared on it. Coming to visit, what the hell is she coming here for? Indeed, just like Sunny, Cassie had chosen Chained Isles as the region to anchor herself to. Their reason was most likely also the same, the proximity of the Isles to the Hollow Mountains. Luckily, she was not a resident of the sanctuary. Sunny had no idea how the blind girl had managed it, but she somehow convinced Clan Valor to let her and her cohort anchor themselves to the second human citadel in the region, the Night Temple. While Sanctuary was closer to the southern border of the region, Night Temple was situated far to the north, almost on the outskirts of the Misty Death Zone. For that reason, the two of them had been comfortably separated and had not seen each other even once in the past months. But now that was about to change. Exiting the White Feather residence, Sunny grimaced. "Glad to see a familiar face. Hell, I doubt it." The sanctuary was slowly waking up. Now that the sun had risen, groups of awakened were preparing to venture outside, while those who had stuff to do in the citadel itself were going about their business. A few of them greeted Sunny as he walked toward the altar island. By now, he should have been able to return to the real world. After everything he had discovered during the night, there was a flame burning inside his chest that demanded action. His eyes gleamed when he thought about the mysterious treasure hidden somewhere out there, in the darkness. But although Sunny was a very rapacious person, he knew how to keep his avarice in check well, most of the time. Shipwreck Island. Sunny had never been that far away from the sanctuary, but he had heard about that deadly place. The Shipwreck Island was situated almost at the center of the Chained Isles, far removed from both human citadels. The nightmare creatures there were especially ferocious, and the islands themselves were far more bizarre and dangerous than those closer to the edges of the region. If one could somehow survive the crushing and look upon the Chained Isles from above, they would see that there was a vast empty space at the very heart of this shattered land. Some people assumed that this was where the ivory tower had once been chained, before all 7 of its anchors were broken. After that, the islands bordering the tier slowly fell into the sky below one after another, making it grow wider and wider. The hole at the heart of the Chained Isles was slowly expanding, and one day, thousands of years from now, it was probably going to devour the whole region. But Sunny had no interest in that remote future. What concerned him right now was that the Shipwreck Island was on the very edge of the tier, and as such, presented a lot of danger for a young awakened like him. If Sunny wanted to venture out that far, he would have to study and thoroughly prepare for a long and perilous expedition. And in the meantime, he had to hurry to the real world. Even though he felt the call of treasure with every fiber of his being, desperate to reduce the gap between himself and Nephi's, the things he had to do back in reality were crucial. Calm down, it's nothing serious really. Approaching the white altar, he glanced at the obsidian dagger suspiciously, then placed his hand on the cold marble. There's no reason to worry so. The lid of the steel sarcophagus silently opened, letting out beams of light and clouds of cool mist. Sunny yawned and climbed out of the sleeping pod, then stretched with a satisfied smile on his lips. His body felt refreshed and energized, as if he just had a long, perfectly comfortable sleep. Not at all like what he had to endure in the past 2 months while using cheaper academy pods. Now that is what I call money well spent. Indeed, the luxurious machine might have been the best purchase he had ever made, not counting the mantle of the underworld, of course. Leaving the compact underground fortress of his basement, Sunny walked over to the kitchen, glanced at the broken remains of his fridge with a bit of shame, and retrieved a few ingredients to cook himself breakfast from the debris. Out here in the real world, it was currently early morning. He sent the happy shadow outside to observe the surroundings, and then turned on the stove. Real eggs, real lettuce and tomatoes, real bread, real bacon, real coffee, real juice. It took him just a few minutes to cook himself a breakfast that would have been considered the epitome of a lavish lifestyle by any inhabitant of the outskirts. Walking to a dining table that was too large for one person, he placed his breakfast on its synthwood surface and activated his communicator. There were no new messages, and he didn't really know what else to do with that thing. Usually, people of his age would have an active presence on the network and feeds breaking with all kinds of news, events, and videos, but Sunny had almost no digital presence whatsoever, nor did he want to have one, really. He knew how to access various resources and services, of course, and many of the things on the network had once been the stuff of his dreams. The unlimited amount of games, books, shows, and entertainment of all sorts was on the tip of his finger. But ironically, now that Sunny had free access to all these alluring things, he had no time to dive into any of them. Right now, he had too much to do, and his dreams were filled with only clangor of steel and nightmarish abominations. Maybe one day. Slowly consuming his food, Sonny used the communicator to quickly sketch and describe the coin he had found, keeping its true secrets to himself, of course. Outside, his neighbors were preparing to face the new day. The sun was rising above the giant city, and crowds of people were on their way to work. The shadow found a hidden spot on the porch of his new home and observed the quiet street from its shelter. It saw a few PTVs drive by, humming slowly as they rolled or levitated toward the exit from the terrace district. Several well-dressed adults walked by, heading for the public transport terminal. Sometime later, it was time for the students in school uniforms to follow them. Sonny sipped coffee and observed these children through the shadow, trying to imagine himself having such a life. Waking up in a safe home, eating the delicious food a parent had prepared for you, not having to think about where your next meal would come from, going to a place where an unlimited amount of knowledge and mentorship was available to you, completely free, having no real worries and no real fears. Just living. What a strange existence that would be. He stared at the students with a complicated expression. They were so soft. Their clothes were soft, their eyes were soft, and their lives, too, were soft. How were these children going to survive the real world? The real world was hard, cruel, and unforgiving, just like Sonny himself was. A person like him had a much better chance of surviving in such a world. Not to mention the hellscapes of the dream realm. Finally, the stream of students grew thin. One of the last to walk past Sonny's house was a young girl of around 14 years. She was about as tall as him, with pale skin and black hair. The girl seemed to be a bit uncomfortable in her own body, like all teenagers tended to be, and the school uniform did no favors to her slender physique. Her dark eyes, however, were very sharp and clear. Luckily, unlike her brother, Rain seemed to have taken after their mother, who was a rather attractive young woman from what Sonny remembered. Even though she was still just a child, he could already see that one day, the teenage girl walking past his home was going to become a real beauty. Finishing his coffee, Sonny placed the empty cup on the table and sighed. Found you. Indeed, the awkward 14-year-old girl was his little sister, Rain. And indeed, it wasn't a coincidence that Sonny had bought this exact house in this exact district of the city. While the terrace neighborhood was nice and charming, the real reason he had chosen this home, in particular, was because it stood next to the place where Rain lived. It was on this street, a year and a few months ago, that he had watched from the shadows as she was having dinner with her adopted family, their warm and happy life displayed for him to see through the wide window of their brightly illuminated living room. Well, now Sonny had a living room and a wide window of his own, even though there was usually only darkness behind it. Back then, he had become painfully aware that his fantasy of saving his little sister was empty and misguided. Rain didn't need to be saved, least of all by a troubled outskirt stray like him, a ghost of the past that she most likely did not even remember. If he had knocked on her door on that night, nothing in her life would have changed for the better. Sonny wasn't the same penniless kid anymore. He was an awakened, one marked as a special strategic asset by the government. He was considerably wealthy, connected, even powerful. But deep down, he still believed that the statement held true. His clothes and circumstances might have changed, but Sonny himself remained the same, twisted and damaged, like anyone who had seen the truth of this world would be. What's worse, now that he had risen above his previous pathetic self, he had a whole swarm of new, much more serious problems. Nephi's, the sovereigns, the legacy of mysterious Weaver, all of these things promised a future full of turmoil and danger. He was not exactly the kind of person who had good things to offer to anybody. So no, Sonny had not changed his mind about keeping himself out of Rain's life. He wasn't going to approach her, and had no desire to meet her face to face. There was, however, a problem. Now that Sunny was an awakened, statistically, Rain's chances of becoming infected by the nightmare spell herself had grown. But even if he forgot about that statistical correlation, there was still a possibility that she would end up in the first nightmare, no matter how small. By now, Sunny was 18, and Rain was 14. Almost every person infected by the spell had fallen victim to it while being older than 16 and younger than 19, which meant that there were about 2 years left before Rain would be in real danger, and about 4 before she would be out of it. Even if they were more or less strangers and didn't owe anything to each other, Sunny felt responsible for her. Perhaps Rain did not remember him due to how little she had been at the time of their separation, but he remembered everything. To him, she was the last memento of their long-lost home. Now that he had the ability to pull some strings behind the scenes to ensure that her chances of surviving the first nightmare were enhanced, be it through access to better battle instructors or something else, he couldn't just sit still and do nothing. But to do that, he first needed to understand how well Rain was being prepared already. Hence, he bought a house near the place where she lived and let his shadows loose to explore the neighborhood and spy on her and her family. When I put it that way, it sure sounds a bit creepy. Sunny stood up, yawned, and shrugged. He was an awakened whose power lay in shadows, deceit, and bloodshed. Before that, he was a street rat willing to do anything in order to survive. Mundane humans had no idea about what he had gone through, what he had done, and what he was capable of as the result. If they did, they would probably be horrified. So, a little hint of creepiness was only to be expected. Putting on a warm hoodie, he walked outside, hid his hands in his pockets, and headed toward the public transport terminal at a slow pace. His shadow was a few hundred meters ahead, stealthily following Rain and keeping an eye on her. No one was the wiser to its presence. Sunny sighed and looked at the cloudy sky. Time to go to school, I guess. Rain went to a rather elite school, as it turned out. Judging by the prices of the homes in the Terrace district, Sunny knew that her adopted family was reasonably well-to-do, but it seemed that he had underestimated either their wealth or their connections. The school was not the most prestigious out there, but it was close, enough that only the kids of government officials and conglomerate heirs attended it, for the most part, of course. There were a few kids who seemed to be there because of their academic achievements, but not enough to make a difference. The children of government servants arrived on public transport, like Rain. The chaebals came in expensive PTVs, which were controlled by personal drivers. Sitting at a table in a cafe a kilometer or so away from the heavily guarded entrance to the school, Sunny suppressed the desire to whistle. That's like something out of a drama. I wonder if I'll see someone getting slapped in the face today. Suddenly remembering his first encounter with Master Jet, Sunny coughed and rubbed his cheek in embarrassment. The happy shadow was still following Rain, stealthily moving from one shadowy patch to another. Then, it waited for a good opportunity and dove inside the shadow of one of the kids walking toward the same classroom as her. Sunny got comfortable and ordered a few pastries and a pot of tea. He couldn't quite believe that he was going to waste time attending school, of all things, even if it was in that very strange manner. He hadn't been to school in a dozen years already, not counting the months spent in the academy. Well, this should be interesting. A couple of hours later, Sunny was ready to claw his eyes out. Not because the lessons taught to Rain in school were boring, but because he had to watch a bunch of entitled kids exist in an enclosed space and make it as hard for everyone to learn anything as possible. The elite school seemed like a place of learning, but in fact, it was more like a battlefield. The hidden politics among the students and the hierarchy of numerous cliques they formed were more complex than the ruthless strife between the factions in the Bright Castle, and judging by their behavior, just as dire. But it was not. No one's life was at stake. No one was going to be exiled and starved to death if they did a wrong thing. All of this was simply about prestige, vanity, and standing. It was utterly stupid. However, once Sonny thought about it a bit more, he realized that it was not. Not to them, and maybe not at all. These kids were put under immense pressure, assigned a numerical value, and forced to compete with each other. As the result, they inevitably developed a fierce sense of resentment toward their rivals, which was only made deeper by the deep sense of insecurity this system instilled in them. No wonder they were at each other's throats. The school was, in fact, not only meant to teach the kids the skills necessary to survive and thrive in the real world, but also to destroy the very same softness Sonny had pondered about a few hours earlier. It wasn't hard to imagine that, at the end of it all, the best and most resilient students would become harsh and jaded, while the rest would simply be broken and discarded. A wasteful system, and one of very questionable effectiveness. Sipping tea in the quiet cafe, Sonny shook his head. Rich people. Luckily for him, Rain seemed to be unaffected by the vitriol her classmates appeared to be more interested in than the actual studying. She sat calmly at the back of the class, avoiding getting embroiled in any drama, and dutifully learned everything the teachers explained to the students. The lessons themselves, surprisingly, turned out to be very interesting. Sonny even found himself enjoying these hours very much. There had not been any combat lessons yet, but he did manage to catch this school's version of the wilderness survival course, as well as listen to a rather intriguing lecture about the early exploration of the dream realm. He also saw a lesson dedicated to various nightmare creatures, their biology, capabilities, and weaknesses. If he had known that much during his first months on the Forgotten Shore, well, it would not have changed much, really. No matter how much a person knew about these things, no sleeper was meant to face challenges of that magnitude. And yet, he couldn't help but feel a bit wistful. He had been denied access to this treasury of knowledge as a kid. Who knew how his life would have turned out otherwise? It would have been a lot more interesting and enjoyable, at least. By then, he had some idea of Rain's depth of knowledge and overall readiness for the nightmare spell, but he still did not know how well she was really being trained. He had to see her during a lesson in combat for that. After a while, Sonny had become a little bit bored. Listening to a lecture about spelltech absent-mindedly, he looked around the cafe. At this hour, there weren't a lot of people there, but that was swiftly changing. The white-collar workers from the surrounding buildings were now on their lunch break, as were senior students of the school. Several noisy groups were occupying tables near him, so he couldn't help but catch bits and pieces of their conversations. No way, when is it coming out? In a couple of months, I think. Who will play the female lead then? No, wait, let me guess. These guys were apparently discussing some upcoming film, excitedly wondering about the casting. Something about their conversation appeared strange to Sonny, but he didn't pay it too much attention. None. That is the mindset of a true battle master. No way, he meant to say that. Who do you think Lord Mongrel is? A nobody? Of course not. He only said that because he considers social status and renown meaningless. In the eyes of a warrior, such things are not even worth mentioning. The only thing that matters is your strength. That's why he hides his noble upbringing. Sonny stared at the couple of young men that were in the middle of a heated debate, then shook his head. That's hilarious. What are the chances? Apparently, there was someone else out there with a similar alias. And that guy, from what Sonny could hear, was not only a total buffoon, but also went around calling himself a lord, pretending to be some wise philosopher and teaching people how to be a true warrior. What an idiot! Well, figures. Only an idiot would choose such an alias on purpose after all. I wonder what this guy's problem is. He has to be horribly insecure about something for sure. Then, however, he had to focus on Rain again, because she was finally heading for the school's dojo. The combat lesson was about to begin. The instructor, surprisingly, turned out to be an actual awakened. It was a man in his late 30s, with a mighty build and cold eyes of an experienced fighter. Sonny couldn't tell what aspect the man possessed, but he was obviously not a sheltered noncombatant. Rain's instructor was the real deal. He had to have enough money to never be required to work a single day in the real world. So the fact that he was teaching a bunch of kids in a school meant that he was doing it either because of his principles or because of an obligation to one of their parents. In any case, it was a good thing for Rain. In the next hour or so, Sonny watched the students train and fight each other with various weapons. He expected them to use fake ones, but to his surprise, the awakened instructor insisted that the kids both wore heavy protective gear and wielded real ones, even if the weapons were blunted to not pose a real danger. Good approach, I guess. Rain's level was better than he had expected. Not comparable to someone like Castor or Nephi's, of course, but miles better than anything he would have been able to do at her age. She was swift, nimble, and strategic, utilizing every opening the opponent presented to her full advantage. She seemed to prefer using ranged combat, but could hold her own in a melee with the help of a wide range of weapons, from a long spear to a light saber. There were kids who were better than her, and those who were worse, but none who could compare to her in terms of wits. And yet a deep frown appeared on his face. There is one thing that is lacking: viciousness. His sister was not nearly vicious enough. Judging that he had seen everything he needed to, Sonny rose and left the cafe, then headed home. The happy shadow left the premises of the school, unnoticed, and soon wrapped itself around his body, but not before showing how proud and satisfied it was with its flawless performance. Yes, you did well. On his way back, Sonny was thinking over what he had learned about Rain. His sister seemed to be smart and well-adjusted, and receiving the kind of training most kids in this world could only dream about. But was it enough? He did not know. No one could know, really. After he had returned from the Forgotten Shore, several people told him that they would have never survived in that hell. But their words rang hollow to Sonny, because how would they know? Until a person was thrown into a situation like that, there was no way to tell what would remain of their resolve once everything else had been stripped away. Brave people broke, while cowardly ones found strength that they had not even known was inside them. Kind people became cruel, while cruel people became lost. Only by looking at a mirror of a nightmare could one truly see their real face. Before Sonny entered the Forgotten Shore, he had thought himself to be strong. But once there, he had to learn the hard way that his strength was brittle and illusory, that it could shatter under the smallest amount of pressure. To survive, he had to build within himself a new kind of strength, one that could not be broken by anything or anyone. That was how he had survived. How was he supposed to know how Rain would measure against the horrors of the spell? And how was he supposed to make her chances of surviving its trials better? Consumed by these thoughts, Sonny returned home and tried to put his mind at ease. This was not something that he could decide in a hurry anyway. For now, he had many other things to do. Activating the Dreamscape pod, Sonny climbed inside and closed his eyes. Time to relax a little. At least out there in the Dreamscape, things were simple. He just had to fight, learn, and win. Granted, his previous visit to the Colosseum had turned out to be a fiasco. But Sonny had high hopes for more elite arenas. He just had to gain enough victories to enter them, about 70 more to gain access to the lower-ranked professional dreams. Not that hard. He had lost all interest in dueling with amateurs, and couldn't wait to meet better opponents who could teach him a variety of polished styles. Better do it quickly. Appearing on the sand of the Colosseum, Sonny sighed behind the mask and willed the soul serpent to assume the form of the somber Odachi. Huh, that's weird. For some reason today, many more people wanted to challenge him. A literal crowd of awakened assembled around Sonny in a span of a minute, staring at him with disturbing intensity. Also, the challengers seemed to be way more talkative. What's up with these fools? Hey, mongrel, what is your real name? Sonny stared at the young woman challenging him, then answered with slight irritation. Mongrel. She smiled knowingly as if struck by a mysterious epiphany, then asked, What style do you practice? Sonny frowned behind the mask. I practice no style. The girl opened her mouth to say something else, but he interrupted her by stepping forward and activating the challenge. 2 seconds later, the girl's dead body was already turning into a rain of sparks. Why are they so chatty today? I don't have a lot of time. If I want to enter a professional arena next time, I have to be fast. Looking at the crowd of awakened, Sonny sighed dejectedly and growled. Words are worthless, silence is gold, don't waste my breath. The challengers looked at each other with weirdly enlightened expressions, then grew quiet. That's better, at least they're an understanding bunch. Now that people seem to have lost their desire to chat uselessly before every damn duel, things went much faster. Sonny had no plans of copying the styles of these talented amateurs today, so he could be as efficient as possible. It required him to really exert himself, though. They were all awakened, after all, each and every one of them. Behind the black mask, Sonny was sweating an ocean and silently whispering curses. But what could he do? He just had to get it done. Because he took no breaks between the duels, his reserves of shadow essence grew dangerously low at some point. Sonny was forced to command the soul serpent to return to his body, to accelerate the accumulation of essence and slow down its expenditure. Noticing that he had dismissed his sword, the challengers assumed that he wasn't going to fight anymore and sighed with disappointment. Glancing at them, Sonny gritted his teeth and hissed. Next, he was not that far from accomplishing his goal for today, and the mantle of the underworld was like a weapon itself, especially if he manipulated its weight to make his blows carry the weight of a mountain, metaphorically speaking. His aching muscles protested, but he endured the torment and continued. Just a few more. As the next challenger stepped forward, Sonny dashed toward him, deflected the glancing blow of a spiked mace with a vambrace, and struck the young man in the face with all the strength he could muster. The black onyx gauntlet grew terribly heavy as it flew through the air, connected solidly, and caused the young man's skull to explode, more or less. Sonny secretly panted and cursed. I can't keep this up much longer. Luckily, he only had a few more duels to win. About an hour after he had entered the Colosseum, Sonny finally reached enough victories to qualify for a better arena. By then, he was so tired that he felt like throwing up. Gotta admit that was incredibly tough, all in days' work, I guess. Throwing one last glance at the crowd of silent awakened, Sonny shook his head. What a bunch of weirdos. With that, he gave the dreamscape the command and left the illusion, both exhausted and satisfied with his progress. Left alone on the sand of the Colosseum, the challengers remained quiet for a few minutes. After a while, one of them said. He shook his head. Another awakened sighed heavily, then said in a solemn tone, Yes, we are not worthy enough. Sonny crawled out of the simulation pod and lay on the cold floor for a while, breathing heavily. How come an illusory arena is so exhausting? The designers of the dreamscape were really weird. The people who frequented the Colosseum were even weirder, though. Sonny couldn't even begin to understand the quirks of their behavior. That's how subcultures are, I guess. After a while, he stood up and went upstairs to make himself some food and replenish all the energy he had spent during this intense and taxing hour. Sonny made himself a light dinner, devoured it with wolfish hunger, and then relaxed in a chair while drinking a cup of delicious tea. As he rested, his communicator buzzed. He took a sip of tea, then opened the message Effie had sent him. "Hey doofus, have you seen this? I think I found a new boyfriend for your girlfriend." The message ended with a winking emote and an attached video link. Perplexed, Sonny clicked on the link and spit out all of his tea. Forgetting to wipe his chin, he stared at the holographic screen in front of him with wide eyes. What the hell is this? The video was of him. Of his duel in the dreamscape, to be precise. Caught in stunning quality, the recording of his short duel against the young man in azure armor was playing on a loop, set to menacing and epic music. The caption read, "Mongrel victorious." Sonny stared at it for a while, then slowly lowered his gaze and looked at the view count beneath the video. 7 zeros. Was that Leo Stryker guy someone famous? Sonny only came to his senses because of the pressure of his flaw. Gritting his teeth, he sent Effie a short message. "I have not seen this. What the hell is happening?" Feeling apprehensive, he went on the network and typed "Mongrel Dreamscape" in the search bar. Immediately, thousands upon thousands of results showed, all featuring the fearsome image of Weaver's mask. Sonny gulped. Oh no, oh no. He opened the first link and almost spat blood. Mongrel defeats Leo Stryker, Taoist Safer, and the Fool in 3 strikes. The short montage of a bunch of his duels played. This one had even more views. That doesn't even make sense. Were those two famous as well? What 3 strikes? I hit the second guy twice. Feeling an approaching headache and a bit of panic, Sonny scrolled through the feed, growing paler and paler with each second. There were countless videos, captions, and discussions. Thousands of people were fervently debating his duels, his identity, and the hidden meaning of his words. It seemed as if they had somehow become convinced that he was some sort of a profound sage, going around spouting words of enlightened wisdom. There were whole discussion boards dedicated to interpreting his teachings. Oh no! Sonny grabbed his head, realizing that the buffoon he had heard being discussed in the cafe was him. Come to think of it, many of Rain's classmates had been talking about this stuff too. Had she seen this garbage as well? He groaned. At least no one seemed to have any idea about who Mongrel was. His efforts to obfuscate his identity were working, as was Weaver's mask. But the worst was still to come. As Sonny was studying the mess he had made, new notifications started appearing in the feed. Mongrel returns. Mongrel decimates the Colosseum. 70 victories in 60 minutes. Lord Mongrel's shocking rampage. Mongrel is Saint Redacted S. Bastard son. Confirmed. He closed his eyes. Gods, what is this crap? Opening a random link, he read in horror. Mongrel 1 sympathizer. I was there, guys. It was incredible. He was like a natural disaster. So awesome. Random shoe. Did you hear what he said? Mongrel 1 sympathizer. Words are worthless. Silence is gold. So profound. My whole outlook on life changed. Random shoe. Wow, my dad used to tell me the same thing when I tried to talk to him after school. Mongrel 1 sympathizer. Wait, Shoe, are you Mongrel's son? User Random Shoe changed their name to Mongrel's son. Mongrel's son, aren't we all Mongrel's children? Sonny closed the link and went to another page. Silence is gold. 1 strike of a sword is worth more than 1,000 words. An in-depth analysis of the post-neonihilist philosophy of Mongrel. Post-neo what? Stupefied, he opened another link. Reacting to Mongrel's 70 wins, you gasp, you lose. And another. Mongrel does not believe in styles. Styles only separate men. And another. I spent a night with Mongrel, a candid confession of a former idol trainee. Deactivating the communicator, he sat quietly for a while and then groaned again. Oh no! The new recording of Mongrel's stunning performance in the Colosseum flew around the globe in no time at all. Starved for new information about the mysterious demonic fighter, people became glued to the screens of their communicators. They were not disappointed by what they saw, to say the least. Mongrel's already considerable renown, or infamy, depending on who you asked, became even more widespread. Sonny had grown up in the outskirts, so he had never been really exposed both to the network culture and to the peculiar fanbase of the dreamscape. That was why he had severely underestimated the effect his recent visit to the amateur arena would have on the people interested in these things. He had only wanted to reach the number of victories required to access the professional duels as fast as possible, but failed to take into account how outstanding the feat of defeating 70 opponents in just 1 hour would look from the side. Especially considering the fact that he had killed the last half a dozen or so with his bare hands, not even bothering to use a weapon. These last few duels looked especially striking, impressive, and gruesome. If before people called Mongrel a sword demon, now he had become just a demon in their eyes. What's worse, even though it took all of his power and lots of effort for Sonny to achieve these victories, due to the fact that his face was always hidden behind the fearsome mask, he appeared to be completely calm and indifferent, as if defeating so many people in a row was nothing to him. A walk in the park. Added to the fact that he had dismissed his sword near the end of the hour and then left after shaking his head, it seemed as though Mongrel was not only a demon, but also held all the rest of the duelists in utter contempt. Mongrel was disappointed in them. That disappointment ignited a fire in the hearts of many duelists of the dreamscape, pushing them to train harder, reach higher, become stronger. Mongrel's status was always in front of them, reminding these young men and women what they were striving to achieve. Mongrel. Victories 100. Defeats 0. And of course, all of them continued to wonder about his true identity. Very soon, someone made a logical connection. An incredibly talented young warrior appeared in the dreamscape soon after the 100 survivors of the Forgotten Shore returned to the real world, putting every awakened there to shame. Obviously, Mongrel was one of these 100 heroes. But which one? It didn't take people a lot of time to solve the mystery. On one of the discussion boards on the network, an anonymous user wrote, "Guys, isn't it obvious? Who is among the best of the Forgotten Shore warriors, and also has a big reason to keep his identity a secret?" Another answered, wait, you're right. It was right in front of us the whole time." And then, the shocking piece of news spread through the network as wildfire. Mongrel's true identity is Kai of Nightingale. Night and Gale Representative Agency publishes an official statement. Popular idol and fashion icon, Night, is not the controversial dreamscape sensation, nor has he ever participated in any scandalous activities under the alias Mongrel. Sonny read the latest news title on the screen of his communicator and covered his face with a hand. Oh gods! How did poor Kai end up being involved in this mess? Had the world gone completely insane? He stared at the message icon at the bottom of the screen nervously, half expecting to receive an angry message from his friend. Or was it up to Sonny to apologize in advance? Kai had seen him purchasing the mantle of the underworld after all. Even though the onyx armor did not look the same as it had before being repaired and turning from pure stone to the strange stone-like metal, there was a possibility that he would recognize it. Why is life so hard? Sonny shook his head resentfully and stared at the ceiling. And then there was the issue of Rain. Sonny had watched her walk home through the eyes of the shadow and was once again consumed by uncertainty. Did he need to intervene? What was the best way to help her? Did she even require his help? There was no easy answer to any of these questions. He turned off the communicator, sat in the darkness for a while, then stood up and went to the kitchen. Retrieving all the things that could spoil quickly from the ruined refrigerator, Sonny cooked himself a decadent dinner and ate in tense silence. To hell with this. I'll deal with all these problems after returning from the shipwreck island. It shouldn't take me that long to reach it, investigate, and come back anyway. A week at most. Why waste time on all this nonsense when there was a treasure waiting for him in the dream realm? Sonny had already retrieved all the pertinent information he could find from the Academy database. All awakened had some level of access to the base of shared knowledge about the dream realm and the nightmare creatures, and due to his position as the research assistant assigned to the wilderness survival faculty, he had more than most. It wasn't really enough to venture on such a dangerous expedition, but at least gave him a basic understanding of what to expect. The rest he was going to have to learn from the people in the sanctuary who had actual experience of traversing those parts of the chained isles. And then there was also Cassie. She could help him even more. With a dark grimace, Sonny washed the plates, spent a few moments admiring their design and craftsmanship, then went about preparing himself for a long stay in the dream realm. Soon, he entered the basement, activated the maximum level of security measures, and climbed into the steel coffin of the sleeping pod. As the lid of the sarcophagus closed, he sighed and thought, "1 week. I bet everyone will forget all about this mongrel idiocy in a week." His gloomy shadow dejectedly shook its head. It took Sonny a whole day to talk to everyone he needed to talk to and gather enough information about the shipwreck island and the routes he could take to reach it. As it turned out, the journey promised to be even more perilous than he had expected. Awakened did not usually go that far into the wilderness of the chained isles alone, and even established cohorts were reluctant to venture this close to the tier. The nightmare creatures out there were ferocious and powerful, and the islands themselves presented more danger than here on the edges of the region. Those people did not have his aspect, though. Sonny did not consider himself to be more powerful than a full cohort of experienced awakened would be, but his powers were tailored perfectly for scouting, traversal, and escape. Even if he was going to find himself facing against an overwhelming foe, he was reasonably certain of his ability to at least run away. Plus, he had Saint. The taciturn demon was worth half a cohort alone and by herself. As the sun was crawling down from the heights of the sky above, he found himself in his room, studying the makeshift map of the chained isles. On it, Sonny had marked the potential routes to the shipwreck isles, as well as known dangers he would face on the way. Of course, such a map was not completely reliable. Nightmare creatures tended to migrate and travel between islands to escape the crushing, but the really terrifying ones tended to stay put. Even taking into account that some of the places he wanted to go through could turn out to be inaccessible due to entering the ascent phase, Sonny was more or less sure that he could reach the shipwreck island in 3 to 4 days while remaining comparatively safe. With one exception. No matter how he looked at it, he was going to have to traverse an island known among the inhabitants of the sanctuary as the Reckoning. Not much was known about that place except for the fact that several cohorts lost members there, while others had not come back at all. Apparently, the creature that inhabited the island was especially twisted and deadly, and was capable of messing with a person's sight. No one really knew what it was, however. All that Sonny was able to find out was that the creature was most likely not corrupted. People were under the impression that it was of the fallen rank, but had different opinions on what its class was exactly. It didn't seem to be a tyrant, at least. "I can fight perfectly well even if it plays tricks with my sight, and it's not like I have to defeat it or even fight it, really. I can just slip past and be on my way." With a sigh, he rolled the map up and placed it in his pack. There was already a bit of food and a few supplies for a prolonged journey there. Sonny couldn't take too much with him, since there was a rather small limit on the weight of things he could pull with himself into the shadows. He could also only do so with inanimate objects, at least for now. He had no idea if that was going to change in the future. Finally, he opened his chest and took out the fang he had retrieved from the dead chain worm on the Iron Hand Island. Sonny stared at the fang for a long time, a dark expression on his face. Cassie was going to visit the sanctuary soon. With this thing and her affinity to revelations, Sonny could make his expedition much safer, not to mention increase his chances of actually discovering the treasure. Or he could avoid having to ask her for help and take much more risk, with no guarantee of success. After a while, Sonny threw the fang back into the chest and closed the lid. "I'd rather die honestly." With a grim smile, he locked the chest, picked up his pack and headed to the exit. As the sun rolled into the dark embrace of the sky below and disappeared, he left the safety of the sanctuary behind, approached the edge of the island, and jumped toward one of the heavenly chains. Sonny traveled northwest, trying to cover as much distance during the night as he could. He rushed across gargantuan chains as a swift shadow, soared up onto the island, traversed them on foot, and dove into the darkness once he reached the other side. He was moving across the chained aisles with enviable speed, but still not as fast as someone capable of flight would. Using Shadow Step expended up a lot of shadow essence, so he had to replenish it often to continue riding the heavenly chains. That, however, put him in a lot of danger. The islands were teeming with nightmare creatures of all kinds, as well as deadly natural, well, unnatural, really, threats. Sonny had to remain cautious at all times, keeping one shadow wrapped around his body while the other scouted ahead. He hid in the shadows to avoid fighting with wandering abominations, or, if there was no other choice, teleported away. These jumps, however, only served to devour more of his essence, forcing him to rest and circulate it through the coils of the soul serpent as he waited for his cores to fill up. Most of the time, he didn't feel like there was a real threat to his life. Sonny's combination of attributes and abilities made him a very hard prey to hunt. No matter what kind of a horror tried, he always managed to slip away, for now at least. As long as he did not venture into the territory of the really terrifying nightmare creatures, like those corrupted fiends that claimed some of the islands or the beings that dwelled on the dark side of them. He was going to be all right for as long as he managed his essence carefully. Against those powerful abominations, though, even being a shadow was not a guarantee of safety. He still remembered the 2 ghostly torches in the dungeon, beneath the ruined cathedral in the dark city. On his way, Sonny visited many islands that he had already explored before, and some that he never had a reason to visit. Each was lethal in its own way, and hid alluring mysteries, most of which were bound to turn out to be nothing but inescapable traps, of course. He suppressed his curiosity and moved past. With 2 skis full of bright stars, the chained isles were stunning at night. Even while rushing forward and hiding from the abominations populating this breathtaking and terrible land, Sonny couldn't help but marvel at its dark beauty. But beautiful things were the most dangerous. By now, he had learned that lesson all too well. At dawn, Sonny finally reached the island that was supposed to be the first stop on his journey. It was a desolate place where nothing lived, with rocky ground and plenty of small impact craters that had been left behind by the debris on the neighboring island. The chains holding that island in place had broken once, a long time ago. As the result, not restrained by anything, it soared high into the sky and eventually fell apart, ripped to pieces by the crushing. Its remaining neighbor was not of any particular interest to Sonny, but it was a good place to rest and catch his breath. Hiding in one of the craters, Sonny ate a miserly breakfast and drank from the endless spring. Then he looked at the rising sun, studied his map for a few minutes, and summoned Saint. As the taciturn demon stepped out of his shadow, at enough of a distance to not subject him to the soul-eroding effect of the broken oath, of course. Sonny glanced at her, tiredly rubbed his face, and said, "I am going to sleep. You stand watch, please." The shadow stared at him indifferently for a second, then knocked an arrow on the string of her bow and turned away. Sonny sighed. He could do without sleep for a couple more days, but it was wise to keep himself in the best possible shape. One never knew what could happen in the dream realm after all. Using his pack as a pillow, Sonny lay down and closed his eyes. Just a few hours. A day later, he reached the reckoning. The ominous island that so many people in the sanctuary dreaded was large, spanning no less than a dozen kilometers across. What's worse, it was supported by only 2 chains, which were situated almost exactly opposite of each other. To get to the next one, Sonny had no choice but to travel the whole length of the island. There was grass covering the ground, with a forest of tall evergreen trees visible in the distance. He could see a rocky hill far away, with a waterfall rushing from a weathered cliff. Just like everywhere on the chained isles, it was unclear where the water came from and where it went. Sonny was already too used to the strangeness of this land to pay it any attention. The reckoning seemed like a beautiful and tranquil place, idyllic even. However, looking at it through the eyes of the shadow, Sonny couldn't help but feel a deep sense of unease. Something was very wrong with this place. It was very picturesque, however. He couldn't see or hear any living beings on the island. There was no sound other than the rustle of the wind, no movement other than the slow swaying of the trees. There were no beasts, no insects, no anything. Not a single nightmare creature could be seen wandering the expanse of the peaceful island. What could be so terrible that even nightmare creatures did not dare to come to this place? Or had they been slaughtered by the owner of the island? If so, where were the bones, or bone dust at least? "I don't like this." Initially, Sonny thought of traversing the reckoning in his usual manner, on foot. But now, he changed his mind. It was better to waste an additional amount of shadow essence than to risk meeting the ruler of this ominous place face to face. If it had a face. With a frown, Sonny used Shadow Step to leave the heavenly chain and appear on the surface of the island, near the shadow he had sent to take a look at it. Sonny did not assume physical form, preferring to remain incorporeal. That way, he would be able to reach the other side of the reckoning unseen. Where is that terrible creature anyway? He couldn't see any hint of it anywhere. Full of grim apprehension, he slowly moved through the deep shadows that were cast by the tall trees of the evergreen forest. No matter how hard Sonny looked, he didn't notice any movement near him. It was as though the fallen abomination that gave the island its name, Reckoning, had simply disappeared. Maybe it can't be seen. Sonny cut off his vision and concentrated on the shadow sense. His perception of shadows came into focus, reaching far and wide. And there, what was that? There was one shadow in particular that didn't belong to anything, approaching him with terrible speed. The bastard is invisible. Sonny froze, becoming absolutely still. In this state, he was not only one of the shadows, but also indistinguishable from the larger shadow he was hiding in. He didn't possess a physical body, so nothing was supposed to be able to hurt him in that state, at least physically. The invisible creature continued to move in his direction, even faster than before. Wait, no, something doesn't make sense. Even if the abomination was invisible, why was there no sound? Why didn't grass bend beneath its feet? It was almost as if the nightmare creature that dwelt on the reckoning was, really, a shadow. Before Sonny could react, the owner of the reckoning was upon him. And then he learned that shadows too could feel pain. Sonny had never fought in his shadow form, and really, he didn't even know how. All he had were his instincts, but that wasn't enough. In fact, Trusting your instincts too much was a sure way to get yourself killed. Intelligence was the most dangerous weapon in the arsenal of a human, and it was Sonny's mind that ended up saving his life. He had realized that his enemy was not invisible, but a shadow just like him only a moment before the creature was upon him. In that split second, Sonny managed to come up with the only way to escape death. As sharp pain pierced his entire being, he lunged forward and escaped the shadows, rolling away on the grass. Jumping to his feet, Sonny staggered and clutched at his side, blood flowing between his fingers. Arg! The shadow of the unknown abomination lunged in pursuit, and swiped uselessly across his body, not causing him any harm. It was just a shadow, after all. Throwing a glance at the thin tear in the puppeteer's shroud and a deep wound beneath it, Sonny took a step back. Simultaneously, he gave his shadows a command to hide themselves under his armor and augment his body. Physical attacks couldn't harm shadows, but shadows also had no way to harm living beings. That was the thought that had saved him. If he had failed to assume the shape of a human in time, he would have been dead by now, most likely. Because he had not, however, he and the shadow creature were now at a standstill. The master of the Reckoning Island tried to attack him several more times, each strike ending up as fruitless as the previous ones. Then it froze, as if slightly confused by the situation. Sonny finally had a chance to take a good look at the hostile shadow. It looked just like a shadow would, like a dark, ethereal silhouette of a person painted on the grass in black. The creature seemed to have 2 legs, 2 hands, and 1 head. If Sonny didn't know what it really was, he would have assumed that the shadow was cast by an ordinary person. There was no one else in sight, though. Backing away and grimacing because of the pain radiating from the deep wound in his side, Sonny stared at the enemy and thought feverishly. No, this is wrong. A shadow creature was, indeed, deadly for someone like him. But to every other human on the Chained Isles, it was completely harmless. How was it, then, that so many people had been killed by it? And what about the nightmare creatures? How had this shadow slaughtered so many living beings? His eyes widened slightly. Sonny threw his hand to the side to summon the Midnight Shard, and just in time. What happened next caused him to shudder. The creature moved once again, and then 2 dark flames appeared in its darkness. A moment later, a human figure stepped out of the shadow. It was a young man with pale skin and cold, cruel eyes of an experienced killer. A spark of madness burned in their depths. The stranger had black hair and was wearing a light armor made out of soft silk and black, lusterless leather. In his hands, the apparition was holding a long, slightly curved blade of an austere takai. Sonny felt fear grip his heart as he recognized the face in front of him. Of course he did. It was his own face after all. Looking at the Devil of Reckoning was like looking into a mirror. That's since when was I so scary? Sonny recoiled in shock. What the hell are you? The apparition mimicked his expression, then opened its mouth. Its lips moved, however, there was no sound, as if the abomination was mute. Sonny had no problem reading its lips, though. What the hell are you? What is going on? Before he could finish that thought, though, he had to defend himself against a lightning-fast strike of the enemy's sword. Sonny deflected the fearsome attack and staggered back, his hands trembling from the force of the impact. Curses! The bastard might have looked like Sonny, but it was much, much stronger. About as strong as a fallen devil would probably be. Sonny had no time to recover before his evil twin was upon him once again, attacking with the painfully familiar grace of his own battle style. This time, the tip of the takai missed Sonny's eyes only by a few centimeters. A vicious smile appeared on the apparition's face. Sonny grunted. As the abomination launched a flurry of lethal attacks his way, each swift and vicious, he struggled to defend himself and fought through the pain. He was barely holding on for now, at least. Because of how strong and fast the creature was, Sonny had no doubt that he'd be killed eventually. How could he fight against someone who knew all his tricks, but was also much more powerful? Even the shadow dance was useless. What was the point in trying to mirror the style of an opponent who had stolen his technique from Sonny himself? The situation did not look good at all, especially because blood was still streaming down Sonny's torso. Between two strikes, he dashed back and pierced the apparition with a furious gaze. "You, poor bastard. Of all the faces out there, you just had to choose mine. Fool, couldn't you have chosen someone, I don't know, taller?" Internally, though, he couldn't help but think, "Not gonna lie, the evil version of me looks sort of awesome. Am I really this dashing in real life?" Sonny didn't really know how to feel about this. He wasn't, of course, trying to speak to the creature because he wanted to chat. He was just trying to distract it while Saint was drawing her bow. A moment later, a black arrow whistled in the air, aimed at the devil's heart. However, the young man with cruel dark eyes simply stepped to the side and swiped the arrow away with his sword. Sonny cursed. He became really despondent, though, only a moment later, when a sudden ripple spread through the bizarre creature's body. In a blink of an eye, the apparition changed. Its face suddenly became white as alabaster and inhumanly beautiful, with ruby eyes, high cheekbones, and full lips. The soft fabric of its armor turned black as onyx and hard as stone. The shape and height of its body changed, too. Before Sonny could even react, he wasn't facing his own reflection anymore. Instead, he was facing Saint's. Crap! As the sickening feeling of his soul slowly falling apart permeated Sonny's entire being, the perfect copy of the taciturn demon raised its bow and sent an arrow flying straight at his heart. Well, one mystery is solved at least. Sonny became painfully aware of how the devil of the reckoning was able to slaughter so many awakened, and why no nightmare creature could survive on its island. If the bastard was able to turn into a copy of any enemy while remaining as powerful as a fallen devil, then very few things could ever hope to escape from it alive. And those awakened who had escaped despite everything mistakenly believed that their companions fell to a creature that could mess with people's sight. What else would they think after watching a human being killed by what looked like their exact copy? Well, why had no one thought that it was an actual copy and not a trick on the eye, damn it? If there was one thing that landed Sonny in this dire situation, it was that people in the sanctuary severely lacked imagination. All these thoughts flashed through his mind as he used Shadow Step to disappear and fall awkwardly to the ground, a dozen meters behind the devil, completely out of the way of the flying arrow. Great, but now what? Just a few moments before, Sonny had been contemplating abandoning the fight and simply running away. Unlike some humans he had met in the past, he wasn't burdened by useless things like pride or vanity. If the situation called for a cowardly escape, he was ready and willing to do just that. But now that the bastard had turned into Saint and was holding a bow, the idea of trying to run was not very enticing. The last thing he wanted was to be hit in the back of his head by an arrow. Think. There was no time to think, though. The reflection of Saint swiftly spun and lunged toward him. As Sonny teleported further away, the creature suddenly pivoted and crashed into the trunk of a tall, ancient tree. A moment later, Sonny emerged from the shadows and saw, with horror, a giant mass of heavy wood plummeting on him from above. Desperately burning through his essence, he filled his body with as much strength as possible and raised his hands, trying to catch the falling tree. As a groan escaped from his mouth, Sonny's feet dug into the soft soil of the Reckoning Island. Somehow, he managed to stop the tree without being crushed by it. It was at this moment that a second arrow flashed toward his heart, only to collide with another one in the air and fly aside. Some distance away, the real Saint dismissed the bow, raised her sword and dashed toward the impostor. "Eat that, bastard!" Sonny gritted his teeth, strained his already overtaxed muscles, and threw the massive tree at the abomination with a tremendously powerful push. When he used his essence and augmented his body with both shadows, Sonny was able to achieve bursts of truly inhuman strength. How was the bastard going to escape this? The creature indifferently lowered its shoulder, then simply disappeared into the shadows and appeared on the other side of the flying trunk. Then, it met attacking Saint with a devastating shoulder bash. The onyx armor of the taciturn demon cracked, and she was thrown back, causing another tree to explode into a cloud of splinters. Sonny paled. Shadow step not good. The apparition turned to him and mockingly tilted its head. Something was very wrong with that thing. It seemed maleficent and utterly mad, but at the same time, incomplete somehow. Behind the evil will and terrifying killing intent that dwelled in its ruby eyes, there was a hint of some other, boundless emotion. Sonny faintly recognized the feeling of it, since he had felt the same deep and indescribable emotion one time before. Far below the hollow mountains, in the darkness of the misty stone labyrinth between two otherworldly rivers, he had sensed the same feeling of loss, anguish, and confusion in the shadows, left behind by the companions of the first lord of the bright castle. What even is that thing? He had no time to ponder about its nature, though, because the creature had once again turned into a pale young man with dark eyes and was lunging at him, a vicious smile frozen on its lips. Feeling a cold shiver running down his spine, Sonny realized that he would not win this fight. Nor was he capable of escaping from the reckoning alive. This time he was truly in danger. He was really going to die on this beautiful, peaceful island, and the last thing he was going to see, before falling into the embrace of death, would be his own reflection staring back at him through the eyes of his killer. Unless... Sonny sent Saint back into the soul sea and met the apparition's attack with a block, feeling his body shudder from the force of the blow. He had assumed that the devil of reckoning was a shadow, and it was indeed similar to one, but really it was not. It only appeared as a shadow because Sonny himself had been in the form of a shadow when they first clashed, and once he had turned into a human, the devil, too, became a human. The young man with the cold eyes of a killer took a small step and made a high thrust with the takai. Sonny, however, knew his own fighting style too well to be caught by that trap. Knowing that the thrust was just a feint, he threw his own blade downward and just barely managed to deflect a vicious slash that followed. He was late by a fraction of a second, though. Another tear appeared in the fabric of the puppeteer's shroud, and a shallow wound on his thigh began sipping with blood. The creature was more of a reflection than a shadow. It mirrored everything about its enemy: their appearance, their weapons, their battle technique, even their powers. Otherwise, how would it be able to use Shadow Step? In a sense, it was a perfect adversary, but that wasn't all. Sonny grimaced as the apparition threw his sword away and delivered a powerful kick that almost turned all of his ribs into bone dust. If not for the burst of essence he had sent to his legs, Sonny would have never managed to dodge that devastating blow. But his essence was already running dry, and his enemy seemed to be even stronger now, as if the more Sonny bled, the more powerful the pale young man became. The devil was even able to mirror the memories its enemy wielded. Before, Sonny had experienced the sole attack of the copy of the broken oath, and now the creature was obviously being fed raw power by the blood blossom. He attacked with the midnight shard to buy himself a couple of moments to think. The apparition had not seemed to be affected by the broken oath, though. Was that because it had assumed the form of Saint, who was immune to soul attacks? Did this mean that the devil was able to copy not only powers and memories, but attributes too? The creature easily deflected Sonny's attack and leaned forward to deliver the final blow. Sonny's only hope to escape it was to jump back. But what else did the creature copy? Was it really a perfect reflection? There was only one way to find out. Instead of jumping back, Sonny stepped forward and collided against the apparition, completely open, unable to escape being struck down by the enemy's blade. Before the deadly strike came, however, he leaned close to the devil's ear and whispered, so softly that no one except for the two of them would ever be able to hear what he had said. "Lost from light, stop." And then the devil froze, as if suddenly turned to stone. Sonny smiled. It was a perfect reflection indeed. The apparition stood motionlessly, frozen in place by Sonny's quiet command. He could see his face reflecting in its dark eyes, even paler than usual, beads of sweat glistening in the sun. The creature was completely still, all its terrifying strength shackled by the four simple words Sonny had whispered to it. It was enslaved. No matter how powerful the strange abomination was, no amount of power could ever allow it to disobey the command of its new master. Sonny. By stealing his face and his powers, the creature had also inherited his innate ability, shadow bond. Sonny had made use of that bond to subjugate the devil, and now it was at his mercy. For now, at least. With a pained grimace, Sonny fell to the ground and drew in a hoarse breath. That was close. The wound on his thigh was not too serious, but the cut he had received as a shadow was long and deep. Blood weave had prevented him from losing too much blood and was going to ensure a fast recovery, but it had its limits. The wounds needed to be tended to, however. They could wait. Right now, Sonny had to decide what to do with the former ruler of the reckoning, the dreadful creature that had slain plenty of humans, and only gods knew how many nightmare creatures, which was now under his full control. Such a powerful abomination. It would surely be very helpful to have something that fearsome serving him, unable to disobey any command. He glanced at the frozen creature and shivered. Looking at it was still like looking in a mirror after all. Despite knowing that the thing in front of him was a nightmare creature, he couldn't help but see a slight young man with pale skin and dark eyes, couldn't help but see himself. Yes, having a fallen devil do his bidding would be extremely beneficial, especially because the apparition looked exactly like him. With a bit of cunning and preparation, Sonny would be able to seemingly appear in two places at the same time. If he ever needed to prove that he wasn't mongrel or accomplish something shady without drawing any suspicion, that would be a perfect way to do so. There were countless scenarios where such an ability would be incredibly useful. But there lay the problem. The creature was only enslaved because it had assumed his form. Since the creature could take any shape, it was going to stop possessing his aspect abilities, including shadow bond, as soon as it turned into something else. Then, it would be free of its shackles and able to do whatever it wanted, including unleashing its wrath on Sonny. That was why he had dismissed Saint before attempting to subjugate the apparition. He needed it to remain as his own reflection, and no one else's. Yes, he could circumvent the possibility of losing control over the terrifying creature, with a long series of complex orders that would limit when and how it could use its shape-shifting. But coming up with a foolproof net of prohibitions was a Herculean task. Sonny wasn't even sure that it was possible. He had spent a long time thinking of ways to escape this exact fate, so he knew better than most, better than anyone, perhaps, how hard it was to keep an unwilling slave under control, especially if the enslaved being was more powerful than its master. There would always be a way to twist words, find a loophole, and turn the orders given by the master against themselves. Sonny was sure of it. He had to be. So, what was he supposed to do with the frozen abomination? Standing up with a grimace, Sonny faced his perfect copy and looked at it with regret. The main reason for what he was about to do, nevertheless, was way less complicated. He simply didn't want to be a slaver. He didn't want to own any living thing. Sonny lingered for a while and then said, "Don't be scared. I won't make you a slave. That would be too cruel of a fate, don't you think? Even for a nightmare creature like you." With that, he raised his hand, as if to caress the cheek of the pale young man, and then swiped it swiftly across his neck. Almost invisible in the bright light, the ghostly blade of the moonlight shard trembled as drops of crimson blood fell from it into the vibrant grass. The young man didn't move, but his pupils widened. A few moments later, blood flowed from between his lips, painting his pale skin red. Sonny looked at the dying apparition, deeply disturbed by the visage in front of him. It was not every day that one got to see himself die. That is. He paled slightly, but did not look away. In front of him, a person who looked exactly like himself was slowly drowning in blood, a crimson torrent flowing from his cut throat. A few moments later, when the creature was on the death's doorstep, its body suddenly trembled and then shifted slightly. A tortured smile appeared on its face. The apparition's lips moved, but just as before, no sound escaped from them. However, Sonny thought that he had managed to read a few words. "We never searching." That was what the apparition had tried to say. Then the light in its eyes extinguished. A strange ripple spread over the young man's body, and a moment later, thin cracks appeared on his skin. After a second or two, the creature shattered into a rain of silver glass, which then turned into a stream of light and disappeared. Only one jagged mirror shard remained laying in the grass, reflecting nothing but cold darkness. As Sonny stared at all this in bewilderment, the spell whispered, "You have slain an ascended reflection, mirror beast." Sonny blinked. Wait, what did it just say? The spell, however, wasn't done speaking. "You have received a memory." Sonny stared at the ground, confused. What just happened? Why did the spell call that thing an ascended reflection? What was a reflection? And why was it ascended instead of fallen? How could a nightmare creature be ascended? He frowned. Was it not a nightmare creature? How is that possible? The apparition was definitely not a human, so what else could it be if not one of the dream realm's abominations? And one more thing. The spell did not say that his shadow had grown stronger, did it? To make sure, Sonny checked the number of his shadow fragments. Just as he had suspected, it didn't change. He even dove into the soul sea and saw that there was no new shadow among the rows of the creatures he had slain. This is very, very strange. What the hell had he just killed? With a deep frown on his face, Sonny bent down and cautiously picked up the jagged mirror shard that the apparition had left behind. No matter how he looked at it, the shard resembled a perfectly mundane piece of glass, with a thin layer of silver painted over its reverse side. The only strange thing about it was that, no matter how Sonny turned the shard, it refused to reflect anything except for an impenetrable veil of darkness. There was also an inscription on its reverse. Sonny's frown deepened when he realized that the inscription was not made with runes. Instead, what he saw were the familiar letters of the human alphabet. They were clumsy and awkward, as if written by a child's hand. There was only one word written on the mirror shard. Beastie. What the hell is that supposed to mean? The mystery of the mirror beast was so strange that, for a time, Sonny even forgot about the burning pain in his side. Eventually, he whispered, "An echo." Echoes did not possess souls, so he expected that slaying one would not reward him with any shadow fragments, just like what had happened after Mirror Beast's death. The apparition, however, was obviously not an echo. It was too independent, sentient, and had too much individuality to be a simple copy of a dead nightmare creature, not to mention that it had been ruling the reckoning for the past few years, with no human master in sight. There was, however, a type of being that it resembled. Sonny threw a dark look at the remains of a tree that had been shattered by Saint's body. In many ways, the strange reflection resembled a shadow. Was the mirror beast a type of echo created by someone's aspect? Its creator must have been incredibly powerful then. If so, where were they? What had happened to them? And why was their reflection wandering the chained aisles in a feral state? There were no answers. It was just a theory anyway. Sonny had no proof whatsoever to substantiate it. Maybe his new memory would give him some answers. He was about to summon the runes, but a sudden pulse of pain reminded him that he was, in fact, still wounded. With a hiss, Sonny clutched at his side and looked around, searching for shelter. He was going to have to tend to his wounds and rest after the fight with Mirror Beast. The memory could wait until after he wasn't bleeding so much. Wrapping the strange mirror shard in a piece of fabric and placing it into his pack, Sonny used some of his last remaining reserve of shadow essence to step through the shadows and appear near the rocky hill in the center of the island. His shadow had noticed a shallow cave there, which was situated, obviously, behind the foaming wall of the picturesque waterfall. Walking on a narrow stone ledge that led behind the waterfall, Sonny checked that the cave was empty, and then entered its cool shade. The cave wasn't very big, but due to its location and hidden nature, there was no better shelter on the entire island. Rather happy with this discovery, Sonny groaned and lowered himself to the ground. Sending Saint to keep watch outside, he dismissed the puppeteer's shroud, then opened his pack and took out a small box containing several thin needles and a span of silk thread. Staring at the needles with a deadpan expression, Sonny sighed. "I hate this part." Due to his awakened body and the nature of blood weave, Sonny could recover from most injuries much faster than any mundane human, or even one of his peers, would be able to. However, if he wanted to be able to travel again by tomorrow, he still had to take measures. With another sigh, he threaded one of the needles, gritted his teeth, and began suturing the edges of the long cut on his side together. The process was not very pleasant, to say the least, so the cave was full of the sounds of heavy breathing and suppressed curses for a while. Finally, Sonny was done. Washing the dried blood off his body with the help of the endless spring, he grimaced and looked around. Now that he had time to take a better look at the cave, he noticed that it had, apparently, been used as shelter by another human at some point in the past. There was a circle of stones built to contain a fire, with a bunch of firewood arranged neatly by its side. By now, the wood had long rotted, letting Sonny know that the cave remained empty for many years. There was a pack much like his own laying on the cold stones near the fire pit. He limped toward it and took a look inside. There was nothing of particular interest there, just the usual supplies a traveling awakened would take with them on a long expedition, most of them ruined by the humidity inside the cave and the passage of time. He did, however, retrieve a rolled-up map and studied it for some time. The map had been drawn on a piece of monster hide, so the humid air did it no favors. Most of it was unreadable, with only a few small pieces remaining intact. Sonny judged that the person who had left it behind was much more knowledgeable about the chained aisles than he was. Sadly, none of that knowledge had been preserved. The only legible word he could easily read was written near the edge of the tier. It read, "I hope." Sonny sighed. The stranger whose map he was studying had most likely been killed by the mirror beast. For a moment, he entertained the idea that the map had actually been left behind by the creator of the strange reflection, but that theory made little sense. Why would such a powerful person leave not only his things, but also his creation behind? Putting the map back into the rotted pack, Sonny glanced at the fire pit and said after a long pause, "I'm sorry that your hopes had been for naught, whoever you were. Now your nightmare is over." With that, he hesitated for a few moments, and then finally summoned the runes. It was time to take a look at the memory. he had received for slaying the terrifying creature that the spell had called the Mirror Beast. A few seconds later, Sunny's eyes widened. Weapon, it is a weapon. Sunny stared at the shimmering runes, excitement rising in his heart. This was what he had been waiting for. Memory cruel sight. Memory rank ascended. Memory tier IV. Memory type weapon. A weapon. Sunny had been searching for a new weapon for a long time. He was very fond of the Midnight Shard, since that was the sword he had carried through the darkest time of his life, and which he had fought his way out of the hell of the Forgotten Shore. It was a very powerful memory, too, one whose enchantment had saved his life on several occasions. However, Sunny felt that he had outgrown the austere Takai, or rather, the obstacles he was facing these days had. Many of the nightmare creatures on the chain's aisles were of the fallen rank, and their tough hides presented a lot of resistance to the sharp blade of the awakened sword, not to mention those corrupted horrors that Sunny avoided to the best of his ability, for now, but was inevitably bound to encounter one day. The other reason he wanted to procure a new weapon was the fact that the unbroken enchantment, while extremely potent and useful, could only be accessed in very rare circumstances, namely, when Sunny was nearing death. This meant that the most powerful trait of the Midnight Shard could only help Sunny if he made a terrible mistake. If Sunny fought with skill and foresight, however, thus keeping himself from being mortally wounded, the powerful enchantment remained inactive, as it had for the past months. Paradoxically, the better Sunny performed, the less useful the Midnight Shard was to him. It was nice to have a last resort, but Sunny did not like the idea of relying on a tool that could only be effective if he failed. He wanted to possess a weapon whose enchantments were reliant on his success, and as such, both strengthened him and rewarded him for doing well. Hopefully this was one such weapon. It was an ascended memory of the 4th tier, equivalent to a memory he would have received from a fallen devil. That was already a tremendous start. His most powerful weapon right now, the Moonlight Shard, had come from a mere fallen beast. Trying to control his expectations, Sunny trembled in anticipation and read further. Memory description. Full of pride, the noble knight made a deal with the Dreamspawn. Years later, the knight had defeated all his enemies and became a mighty king. On the day that his son uttered the first word, the Dreamspawn came to the king and demanded his pay. He left the kingdom with the child and disappeared, never to be seen again. Much later, the young prince returned and stood beneath his father's throne. He expected to be met with joy and warmth, but was met with fear and suspicion instead. Sunny frowned. What the hell does that mean? The description mentioned a Dreamspawn, or rather the Dreamspawn. That was the name of an attribute Nephis had, which she possessed because of being born from a hollow mother. Were there other people with the same attribute among the human race? There had to be, and judging by this strange tale, they had been feared even here in the dream realm. No, that didn't make any sense. Nephis was described as being born of 2 worlds, so how could a native of the dream realm possess the same attribute? Very strange. Maybe the name is just a coincidence. Sunny shrugged, then concentrated on the runes. Tell me what you can do. Memory enchantments, Shapeshifter, Light Eater, Ghost Blade, Dark Mirror. 4 of them. His eyes gleamed. Shapeshifter, enchantment description. This weapon can shift form between a sword and a spear. Sunny hesitated for a moment, then turned away from the runes and summoned the cruel sight. He just had to see this. A tenebrous mist shrouded his hand, and then an elegant sword appeared in it. It was much shorter than the Midnight Shard, with a leaf-shaped blade that was about as long as the distance between Sunny's elbow and the tip of his middle finger. The blade seemed to be forged out of polished silver and served as a perfectly clear mirror. Looking into it, Sunny could see the reflection of his pale face and the wall of the cave behind him. The hilt of the short sword was made out of polished black wood, which was encased in intricately engraved silver near the guard and at the pommel. The cruel sight was light and swift. Sonny slashed the air several times and smiled. It was going to take some time to get used to using a single-handed sword, but he liked it. It already felt like an extension of his hand. It was much more suited for stealth attacks, too. The sword was also double-edged, which gave him more freedom in how to use it. But that wasn't all. Following a mental command, the hilt of the sword suddenly began to extend. A second later, Sonny was holding a long, graceful spear. The black shaft contrasted against the silver blade, creating a beautiful and somber image. The blade itself kept its length, so Sonny could perform not only thrusting attacks but also cuts and slashes. He stared at the somber, elegant spear for a bit, then commanded it to turn back into the sword. This was going to be a challenge. Sonny wasn't really proficient with polearms, but he had seen how versatile, unpredictable, and deadly they could be in the hands of a master. Not to mention that he had wished to have more distance between himself and the nightmare creatures he fought on numerous occasions. This weapon was a perfect combination of mobility and reach, allowing him to effortlessly switch between a nimble short sword and a devastating long spear. It gave him access to the best of both worlds. His smile widened. Perfect, this is perfect. What else could it do? There were 3 enchantments left. Light Eater, enchantment description. The blade of this weapon can reflect, absorb, and expel light. That would be useful to control shadows, as well as potentially blinding the opponents. Ghost Blade, enchantment description. This weapon can strike at incorporeal targets. An incredible ability that would give Sonny the ability to fight against some of the most dangerous creatures in the dream realm, those wraiths that were immune to physical damage. Dark Mirror, enchantment description. Each attack of this weapon can be augmented with elemental damage. It can be charged with any element the wielder has been damaged by. Current charge none. Sonny gasped. A permanent elemental augmentation. This is incredible. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and like the video and comment down if anything wrong in the story. And if have any suggestion to a new novel or want next part of any series, comment down. Our target is to get 1K subscriber. There will be surprise for all of you. Stay tuned.